Coming up on Arirang News. North Korea fires multiple cruise missiles towards the sea off its west coast, just 10 days after its last missile provocation. We take a look at how much of a threat the cruise missiles can pose. South Korea's population crisis worsens, with the number of babies born in November falling below the 18,000 mark, the smallest number ever recorded for that month. In the U.S., Donald Trump wins the second state contest, beating Nikki Haley in the Republican presidential primary in New Hampshire. With President Joe Biden also having won the Democratic primary there, a rematch between the two is highly likely. Good evening. It's 9 p.m. here in Seoul. Thank you for joining us on Arirang News. This morning, North Korea fired a number of cruise missiles into the Yellow Sea, coming just 10 days after its last missile provocation. Our North Korean affairs correspondent Kim Jung-sil has how much of a threat the cruise missiles can pose.
Another missile provocation by Pyongyang. South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff said North Korea fired multiple cruise missiles at around 7 a.m. on Wednesday into its waters in the West Sea. It added that the military had increased surveillance activities and was closely coordinating with the U.S. It's been 10 days since Pyongyang last carried out a missile provocation. On January 14th, the regime claimed it had successfully launched a hypersonic solid-fuel intermediate-range ballistic missile. Experts say cruise missiles can fly very low and are harder to detect as they're beneath radar coverage. Cruise missiles can also hit targets precisely from long range, which is why North Korea is developing them as a military option. But since they're slow, they can be shot down if detected. Ballistic missiles, on the other hand, are powered initially by a rocket and because of their high speed are extremely difficult to shoot down. It's for these reasons the UN Security Council has only banned North Korean ballistic missile launches. But the experts say North Korea's cruise missiles can pose just as much of a threat.
It's not a violation of UN Security Council resolutions, but last year, when North Korea unveiled its tactical Hwasong-31 nuclear warhead, it claimed the weapon could be carried on a cruise missile, so they still pose a great threat.
Another expert, a former commander of South Korea's special forces, said military provocations by Pyongyang pose a threat to not only South Korea, but to the world.
North Korea is known for its very belligerent language, and because North Korea exports these weapons, it has worldwide implications.
General Chun added that the South Korean military will remain vigilant at all times. Kim Jung-sil, Arirang News.
The National Intelligence Service says it'll strengthen measures to respond to North Korean cyber attacks as the regime's hacking attempts and spread of fake news are expected to increase ahead of this year's elections in South Korea and the U.S. The intelligence agency announced on Wednesday that 80% of attempts to hack South Korea's public institutions last year were committed by North Korean hacker groups. This was among a daily average of 1.6 million attacks on South Korea from around the world, an increase of 36% from the year before. The NIS says North Korea is expanding the scope of its attacks to cause chaos in society, as well as raise funds for its weapons development programs. Meanwhile, the Kremlin says its President Vladimir Putin won't be making his trip to Pyongyang before the Russian presidential election in March. Our Lee Seung-jae tells us more.
Amid speculation that Russian President Vladimir Putin will be visiting North Korea for talks with Kim Jong-un, the Kremlin said Tuesday that it is unlikely to be before the presidential election in March. According to Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov, it won't be possible for the Russian leader to visit Pyongyang before the presidential election, with such a visit a longer-term plan. However, Peskov added that Putin will be visiting the north when the two sides can discuss and agree to a set schedule. After meeting with the North Korean leader at the Vostochny Cosmodrome in the Russian Far East in September last year, Putin accepted Kim's invitation to visit North Korea. Last week, the Kremlin announced that it was coordinating the timing of President Putin's return visit to North Korea through diplomatic channels and would announce it as soon as it was confirmed. Meanwhile, White House National Security Council spokesman John Kirby said Tuesday that the U.S. is keeping an appropriate defensive posture against North Korean threats. He added that Washington is watching the situation on the Korean Peninsula very closely and is confident in the level of defense posture in the region. The comments come amid tensions heightened by Pyongyang's continued weapons test and hardening rhetoric. When asked to comment on a possible visit by Putin to North Korea, Kirby reiterated Washington's concerns over growing military ties between Pyongyang and Moscow. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
In the U.S., Donald Trump beats Nikki Haley, winning the Republican presidential primary in New Hampshire. With President Joe Biden also having won the Democratic primary there, a rematch between the two is highly likely. Our Peunji has more.
Donald Trump took a huge step toward winning a third consecutive Republican nomination for the U.S. presidential election on Tuesday by defeating his last remaining Republican opponent, Nikki Haley, in the nation's first primary in New Hampshire. The former president gained more than half of the votes, which puts him on a clear path to securing the Republican nomination. This also follows his landslide victory in the Iowa caucus last week.
And just a little note to Nikki, she's not going to win. She's not going to win.
Nikki Haley, the former South Carolina governor, congratulated Trump, but claimed the contest is far from over, with many states left to cast their votes.
New Hampshire is first in the nation. It is not the last in the nation. This race is far from over. There are dozens of states left to go. And the next one is my sweet state of South Carolina.
As for the state's Democratic primary election, Joe Biden won through an unusual write-in effort. Despite his name not even being on the ballot, Biden easily defeated his two top rivals, Dean Phillips and Marianne Williamson. Tuesday's primary comes after months of heated disagreement between New Hampshire Democrats and the National Party over the primary calendar. The Democratic National Committee decided to change the rules by making South Carolina the first nominating contest of the year, which goes against a century-old tradition of New Hampshire hosting the first primary. Outraged over the decision, the state of New Hampshire decided to schedule its primary ahead of South Carolina's anyway, in accordance with their own laws. This resulted in Biden loyalists unofficially writing his name on the ballot, as he was not among the candidates listed. In a statement, the incumbent president thanked his supporters for doing so. He added the stakes could not be higher, as it looks increasingly likely that Trump will be the Republican nominee. Peunji, Arirang News.
Turning to the war in the Middle East. Israel and Hamas have reportedly agreed in principle to a month-long ceasefire for the swapping of hostages and prisoners. But the plan is being held back. Our Choi Min-jung explains why.
Israel and Hamas have broadly agreed in principle to exchange Israeli hostages for Palestinian prisoners during a 30-day ceasefire. This is according to Reuters on Tuesday, which added that the plan is being held up by Israel and Hamas's differences over ways to bring a permanent end to the war. The report noted that mediation efforts have been led by the U.S., Qatar, and Egypt in recent weeks, focusing on ways to release Israeli hostages in return for the release of Palestinian prisoners, more aid into Gaza, and a break in the war. Citing an anonymous source, Reuters reported that Hamas had initially proposed a months-long pause, but the period was narrowed down to 1 month due to Israel's refusal. Multiple sources said that Hamas has since refused to pursue the plans until it was guaranteed a permanent ceasefire in the future. Almost 4 months on, Hamas has killed around 1,200 Israelis and captured about 240 hostages. Of these, 105 were released during the temporary ceasefire last November, while some have died. Approximately 130 hostages are believed to be currently detained by Hamas. Israel has killed more than 25,000 Palestinians. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu recently reiterated that only, quote, total victory over Hamas would end the war. However, he is under growing pressure to reach an agreement with his cabinet and the families of more than 100 hostages still captured by Hamas. Choi Min-jang, Arirang News.
Now on the local front, South Korea's population crisis worsens with the number of babies born in November falling below the 18,000 mark, the smallest number ever recorded for that month. Our Lee Soo-jin has the details.
South Korea's birth rate dropped again in November. Data from Statistics Korea on Wednesday shows that the number of births came to 17,531 in November, down 7.6% compared to the same month last year. That's the first time the figure dipped below the 18,000 mark for any month of November since data was first compiled. The number of deaths was also the highest for the month of November, rising 0.3% on year to reach some 30,000. An official from Statistics Korea said this is a reflection of South Korea's aging population and that the agency expects the number of deaths to continue to see an upward trend. This brought the decline in natural population, calculated by subtracting the number of deaths from the number of births, to some 12,000. South Korea has now seen a drop in its natural population for 49 consecutive months. The number of registered marriages in November stood at more than 16,000, falling 4.4% compared to the previous year. Marriage figures last year have shown a rather unsteady trend, with July, August, and September recording on-year declines, but there are more weddings in October than in the previous year. While the official from the agency said further observation is needed, he said that the pent-up demand for weddings after COVID-19 has most likely come to an end after peaking during the second half of 2022 and the first half of last year. The number of divorces was also down nearly 7% from the previous year to almost 8,000 in November. Lee Soo-jin, Arirang News.
South Korea will begin implementing major reforms across the education sector to tackle the country's chronically low birth rate and other deep-rooted social issues. On Wednesday, Deputy Prime Minister and Education Minister Lee Ju-ho briefed President Yoon Suk-yeol on the government's key education policies for this year. Beginning with a pilot launch of before and after school programs at 2,000 elementary schools from March, Lee said all schools will begin running the classes from September from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. as a means of reducing the burden and cost of childcare for working parents. Also, as South Korea faces growing economic disparities in areas outside Seoul, Lee aims to initiate the regional innovation system and education to turn universities into global hubs of innovation and local development by allowing them more flexibility and autonomy in designating their curricula. President Yoon Suk-yeol today met with the World Bank President Ajay Banga and promised deeper cooperation, especially in the organization's mission to spread free and fair markets. Banga praised South Korea's expansion of official development assistance and said turning to a donor from a receiver in just one generation is a remarkable success. The two also discussed support for Ukraine as South Korea pledged to help with infrastructure and digital systems. This is the second time the two met, with the first happening in September last year during the G20 in New Delhi, but it's also the first time in 5 years that a World Bank chief has visited South Korea. In other news, as more people seek a better work-life balance in Korea, a growing number of companies have started adopting a partial 4-day workweek system. Our An Sung-jin went out to check how it's bringing change in workplaces.
South Korea's largest steel manufacturer, POSCO, kicked off its new 4-day workweek system this week. An employee at the firm is looking forward to taking every second Friday off so that he can spend time with family.
If I have 3 days off, it'll give me enough time to go on long-distance trips. For my first Friday off next week, I'm planning to go to the hot springs with my family to relax.
This became possible with POSCO's new work policy, where employees get every other Friday off if they fulfill an average of 40 working hours across 2 weeks. By introducing a 4-day work week, the company expects to create an environment that is more worker-friendly.
I think it's a positive change to give employees enough time to spend on personal development, childcare, or to rest with the extra day. Having a flexible work system allows us to build a more family-friendly work environment and gives a better work-life balance.
One economics expert says that introducing a 4-day work week could boost worker productivity.
With fewer working days, work is less dispersed, which means that concentration increases and boosts labor productivity.
The 4-day work week has been branching out to different industries, predominantly around IT companies. Samsung Electronics gives 1 Friday off per month, and SK Telecom allows employees to take 2 Fridays off. Severance Hospital also began a 4-day work week for nurses. However, the same expert notes that not all companies will be able to use a 4-day work week.
Only companies that can make a profit from a 4-day work week can do it. So it's important to take into account the different characteristics of each industry to decide the working system accordingly.
Others raise concerns that reduced working days may lead to more stress and an intense schedule as the amount of work stays the same. The 5-day work week has been only placed in South Korea for 20 years. But these days, other countries such as those in North America and Europe have transitioned into a 4-day work week. Whether this will bring change in South Korea will be something to look out for. An Sung-jin, Arirang News.
South Korea aims to diversify its export portfolio to achieve a new record for overseas shipments this year. During a meeting with related parties on Wednesday, Trade Minister An Deok-keun forecast exports to maintain growth as the semiconductor industry is expected to make a full recovery, with the automobile and shipbuilding sectors also remaining robust. He added that the government plans to focus on key markets in the U.S., China, and Southeast Asia, while also diversifying exports to strategic regions such as Europe and the Middle East. The government has set an all-time high export target of $700 billion for 2024. This year's Oscars open on March 10th in Los Angeles, and before that, here comes the nominations. The film Past Lives by Korean-Canadian director Celine has been nominated for Best Pictures and Original Screenplay. In the meantime, the film Oppenheimer has dominated the Oscars. Our Choi Soo-young has this report.
Past Lives, David Hinojosa, Christine Vachon, and Pamela Koffler, producers.
The movie Past Lives, written and directed by Korean-Canadian director Celine, has been nominated for 2 Oscars. The Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences announced the nominees of the 96th Academy Awards on Tuesday local time. The film Past Lives is nominated for Best Picture, and Direct Song is nominated for Writing for Original Screenplay. This is the 3rd time that a movie by a director of a Korean ethnicity has been selected for Best Picture, following Parasite, directed by Bong Joon-ho, and Minari, directed by Korean-American Lee Isaac-jung. Past Lives tells the story of 2 childhood sweethearts who reconnect after many years, and the nature of their relationship as they grow apart, living different lives. The movie is Song's debut, and she wrote the plot herself based on an autobiographical story. Many of the scenes in the movie were filmed in Korea, and the majority of the script is also written in Korean. Past Lives will compete in the Best Picture category against the other 9 films, including Oppenheimer, Barbie, Anatomy of a Fall, and Killers of the Flower Moon. The film Oppenheimer, directed by Christopher Nolan, received nominations in 13 categories, including Best Director, Actor in a Leading Role, and Film Editing.
I mean, it's the most acclaimed movie of the year, almost $1 billion in box office. It's looking very much like Oppenheimer is headed toward a Best Picture win.
The movie Barbie, directed by Greta Gerwig, has been nominated for 8 categories. 3 female-directed films this year, including Song's Past Lives and Justin Trias' Anatomy of a Fall, have been nominated for Best Picture. Meanwhile, Martin Scorsese, director of Killer of the Flower Moon, was nominated for Best Director for the 10th time. The 2024 Oscars will take place on March 10th at Dolby Theatre in Hollywood, Los Angeles. Choi Soo-hyung, Arirang News.
And on the local cultural front, Korea is scheduled to play host to a number of renowned art exhibitions this year as well. And for those interested, our Kim Da-mi has a preview. Do take a look.
High expectations and excitement surrounds the Gwangju Biennale, which will be held for the 15th time this year. More than 30 countries are expected to participate when the Biennale opens in September. Under the direction of new artistic director Nicola Burrio, there'll be an exhibition that explores a 21st century soundscape based on the Korean traditional pansori folk music. And another highlight for 2024, private galleries are highlighting female-centered fine art. In the spotlight is the Women and Buddhism exhibition that will be held at Hoan Museum, a private art gallery in Yongin City, Gyeonggi-do Province. This exhibition will illuminate East Asian Buddhist art from a female perspective.
This exhibition re-examines East Asian Buddhist art from a perspective with women at the center. Thanks to active cooperation from leading organizations overseas, I think this will serve as a rare opportunity for Koreans to see the treasures of Buddhist art in one location.
The female-centered trend continues across other exhibitions throughout the year. In September, the National Museum of Modern and Contemporary Art is holding an exhibition featuring Asian female artists from the 1960s to present day. Also in September, the Amore Pacific Museum of Art will showcase the aesthetics of a leading queer artist, Elmgren and Drexet, in a solo exhibition. Celebrating its 20th anniversary, the Lyon Museum of Art will hold the largest solo exhibition of Philip Pareno in February, and the Seoul Museum of Art will hold a solo exhibition of architectural master Norman Foster in April to give a perspective into future architecture. Also of interest for fine arts enthusiasts is the return after 20 years of artist Seo Do-ho to the Art Sunja Center. Two of the country's biggest art events, Frieze Seoul and Korea International Art Fair Seoul, are now preparing their third installment this year, drawing attention to whether they'll surpass last year's achievements in terms of number of visitors, quality of participation entries, and total trade volume of artwork. Kim Da-mi, Arirang News.
It has been 3 days since the fierce Arctic cold wave came around. Temperatures in Seoul this morning were at minus 11.2 degrees, and the wind chill dropped to nearly minus 20 degrees. The icy mornings will continue tomorrow since it's going to drop to around minus 10 degrees in most inland areas. With the wind blowing, the wind chill will remain below freezing all day. There's still snow on the west coast and Jeju Island. Although it has already snowed a lot, mountainous areas of Jeju Island will receive up to 20 centimeters of heavy snow by tomorrow. Please be careful out on the roads. Tomorrow's Seoul will start off at minus 10 degrees Celsius. Above freezing temperatures are expected for the daytime in most places. Daejeon and Gwangju 2 degrees, Busan and Jeju 6 degrees Celsius. Athletes and spectators in Gangwon-do Province for the Winter Youth Olympic Games need to stay bundled up tomorrow. Pyeongchang and Cheongsan will drop to around minus 15 degrees. This cold wave continues until Friday morning, then gradually eases off from the daytime. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
Well, that is all for this newscast. Thank you for watching. We'll be back at 10 p.m. with the AI headline news. Good night.